Welcome everybody and thank you for coming. My name's Joanna Bullivant from the Faculty of Music at the university, and I'm going to introduce today's workshop, Radical Music in Interwar Britain. This is part of a research network that's been running events for just over a year across all disciplines, and it's to do with early cultural encounters between Britain and the Soviet Union. So one of the things we'll be talking a bit about is where some of these ideas come from, and a little bit about what was actually going on, as well as much practical demonstration. I'm delighted to have with us tonight the Sea Green Singers and their director, Sarah Westcott. So the first thing that we would like to do today is start with a song. So let's go.
So sentimental and silly when we've got all these kind of crises going on in the world, and there's cost of living crisis, war in Ukraine, war in the Middle East, and I just think, why not sing something better, something interesting?
Okay, let's do it.
Prices rise, prices rise. See how they mount, see how they mount. They raise the price of your daily bread, and given your taxes to fat cats instead, they know it won't trouble you when you're dead. But prices rise, prices rise, prices rise. See how they mount, see how they mount. They raise the price of your daily bread, and see how they mount. They raise the price of your daily bread, and given your taxes back, they know how they mount, see how they mount. They raise the price of your daily bread, and given your taxes to fat instead, they know it won't trouble you when you're dead. And raise the price of your daily bread, and given your taxes to fat instead, they know it won't trouble you when you're dead. See how they mount, see how they mount. They've raised the price of your daily bread, and given your taxes to fat cats instead. They know it won't trouble you when you're dead. That prices rise.
Sorry. Thank you very much for those opening numbers. And the first thing I have to ask is, what just happened? What were we playing at then? As you will have guessed, we set that up, so we have to say thank you very much to Harry, our alliterative heckler, who has volunteered for today. But what this was actually, what we just heard, is an idea from the 1930s about how you shake up music for revolutionary political purposes. And the first thing you do is disrupt the concert. So in the finest traditions of communist thought, which is where all this was coming from at the time, I have come up with a 5-step point plan. So what we have, what we're going to go through in the workshop is our remaining point, this point and our remaining points about how do you get to a revolutionary, a radical, a political music? How might that work? what are all the things involved in it. So as we said, the very first point, and one we just heard, is that you disrupt the concert. And here we were in a recreation I've always wanted to do for about 15 years or more. We carried out this delightful suggestion from the composer Alan Bush. He was also a workers' music choir conductor. We'll hear more about him in a little bit, but here's what he had to say and what we were trying to realize here. So another method, because he had a lot to say on this topic, but another method is to outrival the absurdities of the sickly love song, After the Ball, or the religious shop ballad by choosing a part song of the very worst type with a specially nauseating text. This is sung with the greatest possible technical efficiency and maximum of bourgeois decorum. The conductor might even put on an evening dress or at any rate a black coat and the most uncomfortable of stiff collars. We did what we could to recreate the stiff collars, but with more than a hint of exaggeration so that the audience is not in danger of taking it too seriously. I hope that you did not. A member of the choir sitting in the audience, or Harry in our case, gets up after the performance and asks the choir why they don't sing something sensible. The choir replies that some people like to see this sort of thing and that then this is an entertainment anyhow. The interrupter says he finds it stupid, not entertaining, and suggests the choir should sing something that will make everyone sit up instead of sending them to sleep. Whereupon the choir sings a definitely tendentious piece, the conductor now in his shirt sleeves and with his stiff collar discarded, preferably something novel in every way, both in text and also musically. The interrupter can then appeal to the audience to say what they think, and a lively discussion could follow. More opportunities for a lively discussion at the end, with the Q&A that we're going to have. But before we get to that point, we want to delve a little bit more into these musical possibilities and what they were trying to achieve. So one of the things we can see here is that this isn't just about the songs that you sing so much, although that's really important. It's also about the whole idea of what a concert is. So he's saying a concert, traditionally, the kind of concerts we're used to, are associated with the middle classes, the bourgeoisie. And so what they do, as you can see, I'll explain this in a minute, but you have professional performers. They sing in this lovely, sweet style. They sing things that are about love or nature or religion, and the role of the audience is to sit back passively, let the music wash over them, and to be rather passive in that listening experience. So this is what the bourgeois concert is about, he says. So we've got to get rid of that. We've got to mock it, criticize it, and overturn it to come out with something that is suitable for a workers' culture, that is suitable for the workers. So what we have is that mockery of our sentimental 1890s love song, After the Ball. We have an amateur choir who are ordinary people who have something in common with the audience rather than professionals speaking to a non-professional audience. And we have the political content that Harry brought in and that then we heard in the adaptation of Three Blind Mice with a contemporary text about inflation. So, and this is like not the only time that they were trying to do that. We have lots of examples where it's like one of the ways in which we create this revolutionary workers' music is that we get rid of that traditional concert. So one of the things we can see here, I do apologize, it's quite hard to see, but this is a program for a workers' concert from 1936. And what we'll notice is all the performers are, for example, the Young Workers' Ballet, the Peckham Cooperative Musical Society, the Royal Arsenal Central Choir, ladies section, for example. So we have all of these ideas. These are ordinary performers doing this. They're not just doing a kind of instrumental or even a vocal program. We have the ballet in there. We have Unity Theatre. We have a theatre piece being enacted by a working class choir, and we also have a political speech by Herbert Morrison, MP. So this idea that you have to bring politics right into the concert hall as part of this, that it's not an entertainment, it's about making a point, and that you do that in as many ways as possible. You don't just limit yourself to music or to drama, you've got to put everything in there, and it's got to be the workers themselves who are performing to the workers. So you've got that relationship with the audience going on. Another really exciting way I'd just like to show you about how they did this is that they loved to put on a pageant. This is a bit of a cross between your local village carnival and the 2012 Olympics opening ceremony, in that we have this sort of huge amounts of participation, ordinary people performing, and a very eclectic kind of program with all different kinds of things going on. They did loads of these in the 1930s, and we even have a film of one of them, which I would like to show you, not least because it also shows us some of the kind of aesthetic and the ideas that they were trying to project. So we're going to see a little bit of it. I apologize for the lagginess. This is not the digital file. It was already laggy as an analog file. So we just have to put up with it, but it'll get going after 10 seconds or so. So this is the pageant of cooperation that took place in Wembley Stadium in 1938. How times have changed. The red flag.
Present to you here the pageant of man and his will to cure the disease of his society and the darkness of his mind. It is the pageant of his will to put an end to the so-called competition that throws a shadow of war and the profit-making that ends in slavery. We shall begin with that merry England, which is part the invention of storytellers and partly the memory of a little country where 8 million men and women and children lived on a rich wheat growing off. That was before they were driven from field and cabbage patch to the place that had been prepared for them. The institution, the workhouse, the Bastille, driven by flaming swords from merry England.
So I'm just going to run forward a tiny bit at this point, just a couple of minutes, but you can see what we've had so far is like very traditional rural idyll, and this is like the true England, and we've got maypole and folk dancing, and even a Punch and Judy show. So it's pretty traditional. And then the next thing that happens is, we just go for, we've got the air raid siren.
These are the machines which are going to make a new world, but destroy our old one first.
So what we've had the English pre-modern idyll, and now we have dissonant mechanical music, people dressed as cogs, very excitingly, with this kind of like futurist aesthetic, marching, and this kind of sense of this is where we are now. This is the plight of the industrial worker. And as you may guess, what we get towards the end of the pageant is radical song about what do we do now. So here again, we see these mass ordinary people participating in it, these overarching political messages that are being staged, and all of these different aesthetic elements working together to get that message across. So alternatives to the concert was the first stage in our 5-point plan towards a revolutionary music. Step 2, find your tribe. Who are the people who are doing all of this? So I mentioned before, we have already heard about Alan Bush, who he is a professional composer and a professor of composition at the Royal Academy of Music. He's also from a wealthy background because his grandfather made the stuff that flavors pear drops. So that's another little claim to fame. But despite having this affluent background in as the sort of factory owners rather than the factory workers, he goes to Berlin in this radical phase of the Weimar Republic where there's all this experimentation going on. He gets all these ideas, encounters new music, and he becomes a communist. He joins the party in 1935. Even before that, though, he's already become the director of this organisation called the London Labour Choral Union, which is a conglomeration of working class choirs. So you have like the Peckham Machine Workers Choir and the Royal Arsenal Workers Choir and all of these other groups. And they'd have their separate conductors and singing, and then they'd all get together every so often to do things all together, like the pageants. This wasn't enough for him. He also founded the Workers' Musical Association, which was a much more ambitious project eventually to both have a radical choir, but also to publish music, to record music, to run summer schools for people to learn working people to learn instruments, anything you can imagine about supporting workers in having a musical culture, that went in to the Workers' Music Association. But at this point that we're looking at today, he's all about this, how do you make a workers' music? And he's all in there with workers' choirs trying to do practical experiments, not just theorizing from the armchair. And this is him conducting at the Wembley pageant that we just saw. So it's a definite action shot as well. Some more people we can think of, and particularly thinking about where the influences are coming from for this radical music making and this disruption and overturning of music and the concert. Andre van Gisegem is an actor, and he creates the scenario for this pageant with Montague Slater, who may be familiar to some of you as the librettist of Britain's opera Peter Grimes, also a communist. And they wrote the scenario for this together, but Van Gisegem also has another interesting feature in that he'd spent about 18 months in the Soviet Union working in theatres there. He came back, he eventually wrote a book about it, but he's all about trying to take all of these experiments from the Soviet Union and recreate them in Britain, including in these big pageants. So having these like mechanical figures going along, they're making these points. This feels very much like him, having these industrial aesthetics. Another thing that we don't hear on the film, but that they use is this phenomenon called the speaking choir. And this was doing the rounds of Berlin as well. And this is really the most accessible form of musical interaction that you can imagine. So even if a worker has no musical ability or no musical training, they can all speak in rhythm and make a political point. So that's what a speaking choir is. So all of these things are bringing in these influences from the Soviet Union. Another important influence that we have, so on the right here, the playwright Bertolt Brecht, and his favorite musical collaborator was not Kurt Weill, it was Hans Eisler. So there they are together. They were doing all kinds of experiments with workers' organizations and new music in the late 20s, early 1930s in America, in Berlin, right up to 1933. They are then in exile and they start out in London. Eisler visits London several times. He hangs out with Bush. Bush goes on holiday with them at one point to Denmark. They turn up in New York, and they're all about what have we learned from Soviet techniques about militant music, about radical music, theatre, all of these things. How do we make these points? So they're really kind of influential on what's happening in Britain at this point. Point 3 in our 5-step plan. So having decided that we need to overturn the middle-class musical culture that is the norm at the moment, the first thing we need to do is find a new repertoire. And one thing Alan Bush definitely thought was that in 1929, the workers' choir's repertoire was pretty deadly. So they were singing songs by Elgar. They were singing the Song of the Volga Boatmen and these kind of things. So there was nothing inherently wrong with these pieces, but he's saying this is no different from what a middle-class choral society or a middle-class choir would sing, and it has no relevance to the urgent issues facing the working class. So just as Harry said, after the ball may sound very pretty, but it's not going to help the workers in what he felt was this crisis phase in the second half of the 30s, where country after country is falling to fascism, and there's these sort of polar opposites, different extreme worldviews going on. We've got to do something. There's been a depression. We've got to do something, and after the ball is not going to cut it. So what do we sing instead? So their main answer to this, after a lot of experimentation, was to produce something called the Left Songbook, which is quite a famous publication. It came out under the auspices of the Left Book Club, which was a big thing in the 30s, where you'd sign up and you'd get a book once a month in a yellow cover. And one of the things they did was the Left Songbook. It was edited by Bush and his friend Randall Swingler, who was also a communist and a poet, but not the best poet around in the 1930s in Britain. And they did lots of things. We've already heard one thing they did, which was the Price is Rise round. So they said, here's like some familiar tunes that you can sing us around, and here are some topical texts. And this is the easiest route to saying something topical rather than something traditional, because everybody knows Three Blind Mice and Frere Jacques and London's Burning and all these songs, so you just stick a new text on it. But they also were saying, we don't want to have this sort of 19th century repertoire as such. We want to introduce some new things, and we want to introduce things that sound new and also that are international. So saying this is an international movement, that we're connected to workers everywhere who are trying to bring about change, and so we have to sort of have that solidarity with them. So we have songs by Eisler in the Left Songbook. We also have this number by Shostakovich, Salutes to Life. And we see that some of the things that Bush is talking about what may, apart from being international, apart from being topical, what should these songs be like? And one thing he says, vigorous movements in the bass are essential. So having a good beat and an energetic style devoid of sentimental elements. So we need a new repertoire. It's got to be non-sentimental. It's got to have a lively rhythm, and it should be international. So what we'd like to do as our next performance is to sing Shostakovich Salute to Life, to give you an idea.
The voice of the city is sleeping. The factory's thunder and beat. A bit of the wind and relentless. That echoes of shuffling feet. Yet comrades face the wind, salute the rising sun. Our country turns towards the dawn, new life's begun. The wind has a breath of the morning, they meet it with banners unfurled. Let joy be your clarion, comrades, we'll march in the dawn of the world. Comrades, face the wind, salute the rising sun. Our country turns towards the dawn, new life's begun. Salute to the soldiers of freedom, to comrades whose burdens we share. Divide with them sorrow and gladness, our labor, our plans and our care. Let comrades face the wind, salute the rising sun. Our country turns towards the dawn, new life's begun.
Thank you very much. I mean, as we were discussing this afternoon, it's a little bit jaunty, or like almost a little bit too jaunty, this particular number. But we think this is sort of also, and almost inappropriately for the text as well, because we have this starting out, the factory, thunder and beat, the bitterness of the wind. So it's like the workers suffering. You always start with the workers' current suffering, and then you sort of have the hopeful bit at the end. So here's what you do to make things better. But I think how we can understand this as well is that this is really one where you can imagine this is meant to be sung marching, or meant to be sung, you know, as part of an event, as part of something outside, perhaps, rather than being a concert performance. So again, taking us out of this very rigid concert hall environment and out into the streets, potentially. I mean, if I can put it to the choir as well, do you feel, would this be achievable on the march in such a situation? So,
Kind of, I think you'd struggle a bit.
yeah, it's a bit too elaborate.
Yes.
Yes. Which is also another rich feature of this period is trial and error and things that work well or less well depending on their musical complexity. So we have a new repertoire that is topical and has the beat, is supposed to be non-sentimental. But this is not all we do, because our next point is possibly the most important. Step 4 of our 5-point plan is ditch the cantabile. So the cantabile style, the Italian term for a beautiful singing tone. So we can imagine going down the road to the Oxford Song Festival, and not in every concert, but this is what you would expect to hear, is this cultivated, beautiful singing tone that is really something very far removed from everyday speech, and that's the point of it. And Eisler talks about this. We said Eisler is a big influence on this period. He says, it's essential to break with the lovely singing typical of choral societies. The aim has to be a very precise, tight, rhythmic style of singing, cold, sharp, and trenchant. And Alan Bush took this up as well. He said the words of songs should be hurled at the audience. And we can also see, so much of this is not just about what you compose, and then you compose something and then throw it out there and it just doesn't do anything. This is a performance aesthetic, and this is about how you sing as well as what you sing. One thing we can see this in action as well. So the image here we have is Alan Bush's song, Song of the Hunger Marchers. Yet again, we're marching. We're always marching and being militant. And it's very difficult to see, but where we have this stamp in the text, you've got a little cross for the note head instead of a round blob, which we'd normally use. And what this means is it's meant to be unpitched. It's meant to be shouted rather than sung. So rather than us going stamp, 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 which would be, you know, the melody indicated, we want to just go stamp, stamp. You can do it however you want, but the point is it should be hurled at the audience. So after you have donned some protective clothing, we will perform the Song of the Hunger Marchers now, and then we're going to workshop it a bit and see if we can nail this style of performance that they're going for, that they seem to be indicating here. So.
We march from a stricken country, from broken hill and vale, where factory yards are empty and the rusty gear for sale. Our country will not thrive again, our strength is not for use. The bubble of prosperity has never come to us. They rise to our dream when you hear us marching by. For civility is dead and the means test too shall die. Do we think our spirit's broken because we're underfed? We must stand for Salvation Government beneath the workers' tread. Stamp, 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 stamp. We will stand for Salvation Government beneath the workers' tread. Remember, fellow workers who earn a wage today, that they throw you on the scrap heap when they find it doesn't pay. All you who are employed, making cartridges and bombs, will be marching side by side when the final crisis comes. Very proud to our tread when you hear us marching by. For civility is dead and the means test too shall die. Do we think our spirit's broken because we're underfed? We will stamp the Salvation Government beneath the workers' tread. Stamp, 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 stamp. We will stamp the Salvation Government beneath the workers' tread.
Don't sit down. One thing I should have said also, for those who aren't familiar, the Hunger Marchers were a real thing in the 1930s. So they were a group of many men and one woman, Ellen Wilkinson MP, later became part of the post-war Labour government, and they marched from Jarrow in the northeast to London to protest hunger that people were experiencing. The means test as well, this was a very unpopular policy whereby, let's say you're a family and the main earner, the man, is unemployed, then somebody from the government would come back round and assess you for unemployment benefit, and if it happened to be that your wife earned a very little bit doing something else, or you had an elderly parent in the house who was earning a bit doing something, you'd get less dole. So it was a bit like universal credit for the 1930s, and was extremely unpopular. So we've got this sort of very topical thing, and this sort of reenacting this thing that was actually a very famous and evocative political protest of the 1930s as well. I think perhaps as well we could have more hurling with this. So I think we still have a certain amount of cantabile, so in here. So if we could, so one of the things we've been talking about, but we think is where we have like because we're underfed, and if we have those nice long vowels, we're going into the bourgeois choral society territory, where we really want to be in the angry workers saying it like it is territory for this true performance aesthetic. Equally, like, I think Giles is already nailing this, but having things like use of the pedal on the piano, where it makes everything very smooth and flowing, is again not what we want. We want it to be like a percussion instrument, that it's really, really spiky. So I wonder if we could try that again and really, as the audience, feel like we have to sit back a bit in our seats due to the spikiness of the performance.
Just the chorus.
When maybe we could do like one verse and chorus, if that's okay. Yeah, we've got plenty of time.
You said first verse again?
Yeah.
We march from a stricken country, from broken hill and vale, where factory yards are empty and the rusty gears for sale. Our country will not thrive again, our strength is not for use. The bubble of prosperity has never come to us. The doors of the death will us marching by, for civility is dead and the means test too shall die. For we think our spirit's broken, because we're underfed. We will snap the starvation government beneath the workers' tread. Stamp, 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 stamp. We will stamp the starvation government beneath the workers' tread.
Was everyone feeling a little intimidated there, I think, in the thing? Yeah. I really like that, and I particularly liked the underfed, but also the for civility is dead. That was really, and that sort of spitting it out, that was really, I think, the kind of performance aesthetic that we're going for with this, and that they were trying to cultivate at this time. So thank you. Excuse me. So we're up to our 4-point plan. So we've got out of the concert hall. Again, possibly a song that seems like it should be sung on the march, but whether it actually could be or not is, I would err on the side of not. But we're evoking this idea. We've got our players in place. We've got our repertoire. We've got our mode of performance. So our final thing that we have to do is bring the audience with us for creative revolutionary music. So as the left songbook says, this is a repertoire of songs which can be used on any occasion, public or private, at which people united by a common determination to work for the same society of socialism may feel the impulse to utter their unity of purpose in the traditional way of singing. So singing together so the idea goes, is something that makes us feel the same sentiments, to be on the same page in terms of our thinking. Now, we are not thinking about the sane society of socialism right now, but if we were this workers' audience of the 1930s, and the choir are all signed up already, this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to persuade you through their musical articulation of their political position. And so the way that they want to do that is to get you singing too. I can see looks of horror around the room, but don't worry, we're here to help. But we would like to try an experiment now of this time. So, because this is how the audience is rendered active. This is how you stop sitting back enjoying the beautiful music and get involved in the socialist revolution, as well as the singing. But we'll just focus on the singing for today. So we have yet another song from 1930s Britain that tried to do this. And the idea is that the choir sing the questions and the audience sing the answers. So what we're going to do is the choir are going to demonstrate first, so you get a sense of it. And Giles is just going to play the melody line. We'll have a little go with support from the choir. And I'm also looking at my musician colleagues for, full-throated, hearty participation in the audience. And then we'll see if we can do a performance. And we're very interested in how easy it is to learn this as an audience, and also how, as my daughter would say, who's 12, how cringe it is. So that's also an important thing. So.
Are the workers badly fed? Yes, most of them. Are the workers badly housed? Yes, most of them. Do the children ever feel the pinch? Yes, most of them. Are they always being rocked? Yes, 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 all of them.
There you go, it's easy.
Yeah.
But people can also shout, can't they?
Yeah, we were saying that we're definitely going for point 4 in the performance style of it's much more important to, just to get the statement out there than to worry about hitting the tune, which does get a little stratospheric at times. So, yeah, we should definitely sort of think about that. Could we maybe have one more rendition before, and then we will move and hope to encourage people.
1, 2, 3, go.
Are the workers badly fed? Yes, most of them. Are the workers badly housed? Yes, most of them. Do their children ever feel the pinch? Yes, most of them. Are they always being rocked? Yes, 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 all of them.
Brilliant, and I could hear people already joining in on that occasion, so that's amazing. And and Hazel, are you going to join the audience, or? Yeah, well, I think we should keep a good contingent here for so we do have the kind of back and forth as well. So yes, you're helping the choir, the audience, and when the choir are doing the choir bit now. So the choir, are now not doing the answers. So we'll have to see how it goes with the answers. Okay, should we start?
2, 3, 1, 1.
Are the workers badly fed? Yes, most of them.
sorry, no, we'll have a little pause there, I think. I mean, I actually think that was amazing. So, you know, everyone's doing like it's really impressive how quickly everyone's picked it up, because this was one of our questions, was how teachable is this? Is it going to be very easy to pick up, or is it kind of over-engineered for the purposes of audience participation? So how do you feel it's going?
The last bit is trickier.
Yes, yeah. Yes, indeed, yeah. Yeah, exactly. So it would be easier if it wasn't. Would you like to have a run through, and then we can transition to the Q&A period? So yeah, and wine as well. It's in due course, which we need a stiff drink after all this effort in a performance. I'm going to go and do the thing. Yeah, we're gonna do all three. We're going to go on to the, what you need to do now verse at the end as well, and I will move the PowerPoint. Yeah. The last two lines, just like we all faltered there, didn't we? Just so we're quite.
We didn't win the last two lines.
Yes. Yeah. So, yes, I said any unsung questions or indeed answers for our next session. So, thank you so much for your eagerness to participate in what is a slightly strange practical musical experiment and historical reconstruction. What we'd like to do now is, we're very interested in your thoughts and comments and any questions you have. So I and Sarah and Hazel and Sue will just sort of come forward, and I have a roving mic. So if anybody would like to ask questions, then we can, thank you very much. And I'll steal your chair. So, yeah, that would be great, thank you. So, if we sort of move our chairs forward a little bit, perhaps, we can sort of hear what you think of all this and answer questions about it. Yeah. So, actually, if I may take the prerogative of asking a question of you first, how does this is this ancient history, or does any of this relate to what you do now as a political choir? We've got mics, so it's just for audience members. Yeah. No,
Sue, you kick off.
Okay. I think it's about a revival of the political choir movement in the 1980s. I don't know how many of you will know the history, but in the early 1980s, there was a very big strike by the miners about pay and about employment and keeping the mines against Margaret Thatcher, which was widely supported, and many people on the left supported the strike and worked very hard to make it work, but then it failed. And so I think there was a general feeling that we could do no more against Thatcher. That was it. So people created choirs. It was interesting that most of them were actually in the north of England, in the industrial north, rather than down here. So Sheffield, Nottingham, Leeds, Bradford, choirs sprang up of large numbers and sang political songs. And where we were a bit late to this particular party, the Sea Green Singers started in the early 2000s, but that is very much the tradition that we're part of, and I would see it as a revival of what Alan Bush was working for.
Yes, and just to add a bit to that, that we, Joanna mentioned the Workers' Music Association. You'll probably know of the Workers' Educational Association, and there was a course run here in Oxford by the WEA called Songs That Changed the World. And in 2001, a number of us were members that were on that course. And that's where the Sea Green Singers started. So we've been going for over 20 years, calling ourselves a political choir, joining there's probably 35 or 40 political choirs around the country now who get together once a year or so. A lot of them have wonderful names. My favourite is Red Leicester, obvious reasons. But we're the Sea Green Singers, and we call ourselves that because of the colour that the levellers used. Leveller men wore sea green ribbons in their hats, and women made clothes out of sea green cloth, and the levellers are remembered every year in Burford at an annual ceremony, so that's why we call ourselves the Sea Green Singers.
We started from the Workers' Educational Association, but our repertoire now is much broader. We describe ourselves on our website as singing songs about peace, justice, and the environment. How many people know that today is the first day of COP28? Hands up. Good. You thought you were off the hook. I've been in Cornmarket with Extinction Rebellion today, handing out leaflets and talking to people about COP28. You're now going to sing around to a well-known tune called Cut Our Carbon Down to Zero. Now, you all know Frère Jacques. Okay, I'm going to teach it to you. So it starts, cut our carbon down to zero. Cut our carbon down to zero. Do it now, do it now. Do it now, do it now. Citizens' Assembly, Citizens' Assembly. Citizens' Assembly, Citizens' Assembly. Tells us how, tells us how. Tells us how, tells us how. Excellent. Right, we'll do it through once more, the whole thing in unison, and then we're going to divide up for a canon. Now, can we do this? I'm going to try, let's go for it. First part, second part, third part. Let's see if it works. Don't let me down, folks. Right, let's sing it all together first, just to get the words in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Cut our carbon down to zero. Do it now, do it now. Citizens' Assembly, Citizens' Assembly tells us how, tells us how. Cut our carbon down to zero. Cut our carbon down to zero. Cut our carbon down to zero. Do it now, do it now. Citizens' Assembly, Citizens' Assembly tells us how, tells us how. Cut our carbon down to zero. Do it now,
do it now. Citizens' Assembly, Citizens' Assembly tells us how, tells us how.
Well done, you've been singing in harmony, folks. That's how easy it is.
Yeah. No, I think. I mean, I think it's fascinating how because also when we were looking at the pageant as well, they were talking about the Levellers song and the Chartist song and all of these and folk song and things. So they're kind of like reaching back in this tradition of workers' movements, workers' music as well. And then this is sort of still carrying on today, but also that you're still carrying on the same techniques of using the rounds, but now we're thinking about climate change rather than inflation, although indeed that one would be topical too now. So, yeah. So can we now open, are there more questions from the, or comments from anyone in the audience?
Sorry, can you recap on his Levellers work? Sorry.
So the Levellers, they're kind of like a radical movement. They're about in the English Civil War. So there's the Levellers and also the Diggers, and they're basically, they're kind of like proto-communists, where it's all like about living together. No, I'm sorry, I've incurred a raised eyebrow, but in the, it's all about sort of
Diggers, yes,
living together and sharing and that kind of cooperation and workers doing better. Yeah.
Still around, or was that a thing?
Not as such,
No,
but there's a Levellers Day every year in Burford to commemorate 3 Levellers who were shot outside the church in Burford for not obeying a direct order from the army to go and fight in Ireland, because as far as they were concerned, the Irish were their brothers and they refused to fight against them.
Completely sort of left field question. I was just interested to know whether any of the suffragists would be singing when they were marching. If anybody knows anything about that.
Yeah. There's a march of women by the female composer Ethel Smythe that was, I mean, people, that is still learnt in schools and things today, but she was in prison for protesting at one point, and they came and sang it outside her window, and she conducted with her toothbrush. so
that goes.
Yeah. Yes.
Since the microphone's here, I'll ask another question. It's really about what happened next. Did Bush's ideas shift the dial? Did lots of workers and marchers start picking up on his hoped for change, or did it just kind of dissipate?
So I'll try not to give a very long answer. So the kind of things that we're seeing with the pageants, they're sort of reached the kind of apex in 1939. And then, of course, the Second World War hits. And not only do we have like all the theatres are shut and things like this because of the Blitz, and orchestras and things are moving out of London, so there's this huge cultural turnaround. But also you have, with the communists, you have the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. So all of a sudden they're saying, we've got a treaty with Germany. So the Soviet Union has a treaty with Germany. So it really sort of isolates the communists and puts them in this difficult position of, how do we relate to the broader left-wing movement? So those two things kind of like cut all this off at the knees. But interestingly, it does get going again once there's the Soviets switch sides. So after Operation Barbarossa, suddenly everything's about solidarity internationally and all of these kinds of things, and aren't the Red Army great? And like these guys are some of the only experts on Russian music and Soviet songs in Britain. So they've got gigs on the BBC World Service and things like that. And this sort of lasts into this honeymoon period until about 1948. The Workers' Music Association gets a grant from the Labour government in 1945 that carries on until the Conservatives get back in. So there is this kind of, it's more like this sort of like trying to build a culture in which workers can have music and engage in musical activity and think about what post-war Britain's going to look like, rather than this sort of like, we're in this crisis with fascism and we need to act now. So it changes, but it does have a legacy. And then it sort of gradually, more in the Cold War period, gets sort of frozen out a little bit.
Thinking about both my grandfathers, who were both at British, well, at the car factory, and thinking about, you know, being part of the union there and also part of the brass bands, and that was a big part of factory life. Here it was the car factory, but every large factory, I think, or thing would have a brass band. Things after the in the post-Second World War period, they were playing much more traditional music, and I was just wondering how much that would have been in conflict with this style of choral music.
Yeah, shall I answer it? I think it was sort of, this is where we're kind of, you saw in the Hunger Marchers song with, no, in the question and answer song, it's like, are the workers conscious of the class? And it's like, well, some of them. So it's like this kind of thing with the brass band playing like romantic arrangements and this kind of thing would be like, you know, they're not class conscious when they're doing that yet. So we could try and change that, because you notice there was like, it was heavy on the brass band in the film we watched. So there's some involvement, but then there's also like a lot of working class music going on that isn't like this. And a lot of, like, Alan Bush is always bitching in his letters in the 1930s about the Philistine tastes of his choir members, and how you have to sort of introduce this all very, very gradually, and they still like singing this sentimental old song, and there's no arguing with them. So there's definitely like a disparity as well between his ideal and then reality of what they ended up doing. Yeah.
And I could just, I was just adding a thought that we've just done a gig in which we talk about protests in Oxfordshire over the centuries, and to do with the Cowley works, the car works, I looked to try and find any songs that were of that era, well, we're talking about the 30s, to do with car workers, and I couldn't find any. I mean, there's a number of red songbooks about, and there's kind of folk tradition of, you know, saying how things have changed, and it's, you know, and people writing that kind of folk song. But to find an actual song of this sort, especially to do with car workers and the car industry, not at all. So maybe they weren't writing them.
Maybe their working conditions were too good to inspire protest songs. I don't know.
No. We had a song written specially for
Somebody
us.
wrote one
Someone
for us.
researched the history. A local folk group, actually. Musician from a local folk
But not
group.
of the era, which is the sort of significant thing.
You indicated that this came out of Germany and Russia and the relationship with Russia. In what way has Russia continued or not continued with the same movement?
Yeah, so they did a lot of Soviet songs moving forwards, and they actually, because the Workers' Music Association also founded Topic Records, which many will be familiar with as the sort of radical and folk label later on in like the 1960s. So some of their very earliest recordings are like songs of the Red Army Choir and this kind of thing. So they sort of maintain that connection, and they sing like a lot of Soviet songs, but then they also kind of increasingly in the post-war period, they want to do like, it's like songs of South America and songs of Asia. So it's all these sorts of Cold War proxy wars that they're taking up. So, but they do continue them. And certainly like the choir doesn't go to the Soviet Union, but Alan Bush goes many times to the Soviet Union. So, and he sort of will send them songs and things like that. So he had a bit of success with one about Yuri Gagarin that did the rounds on Soviet radio that he composed, for example. So.
This sort of segues into what I was just thinking, actually. The background context to whatever was going on was the Spanish Civil War. And Pathé newsreels were coming in, whatever, every couple of weeks. Yeah. And that war was very demonstrably influenced, certainly with the left-wing elements of it, by songs and propaganda, and it was a powerful motivator. Did they sing Spanish songs at all? Did Bush, did that come into any of his repertoire?
Yes, so one of the Festival of Music for the People, which was one of these pageant events, but it had other concerts as well, and they had the Basque Children's Choir. So there was a Basque Children's Choir that was going around doing gigs and sort of raising awareness and things, so they performed as part of that. And there were, I mean, other composers as well being inspired by it. So there's a song cycle by Benjamin Britten and Lennox Berkeley, which it's all based on around Barcelona, and they composed it so it's de-individualized, so you can't tell who composed what. That's the idea. The Alan Rawsthorne piano concerto includes a quotation of the Bandera Rosa from the revolutionary song from the Spanish Civil War. So there's a lot of that going about, yes, absolutely, and not just sort of singing Spanish songs, but having this sort of Spanish representation at your events as well. So, yeah. Could I possibly pose an open question of what you thought about the participation, what you thought about the songs, whether they work, whether they should remain in the dustbin of history? I'd be very interested to know your thoughts on that subject.
I thought your stooge was really clever. I really appreciated that. Your confederate who started.
Oh, our heckler. Yes. No, it was outstanding. Yeah. Yeah. He's blushing now. Yeah.
Well, it reminds me of your audience, really. I think if your audience is bigger, it might work against you almost, because people get embarrassed with people all around. But we're kind of a self-selecting audience to be here.
Yeah. Well, that's very true as well. But then their audiences would have been self-selecting too. So.
I feel that if you want people to be more militant when they're singing and participating, that it would be better if they stood up.
We did, yeah. We said this before and then we forgot. We were saying in the question and answer we should be.
I feel that in order to get the message across, if you want your audience to be more participant, is for them to stand up, because it's easier to express yourself when you're singing standing up.
Yeah.
You could be angrier when you're standing up, can't you?
Yeah.
You're a bit sort of,
Yeah. No, absolutely. But yeah, it's interesting though if you can sort of, as an audience, if you can sort of like get behind this, or whether this is like just very embarrassing, like when you're having to like try and sing the hymns in church and things like that, whether it's got that sort of vibe.
It goes a bit high for some people.
Yes. Yeah. But I mean, what I'm hearing is it's more the sort of technical modifications rather than the entire enterprise. That's, yeah, don't know.
I mean, our experience of singing out in public is that you need very simple songs, very repetitive, very easy to pick up chorus, like extremely repetitive. It's no good having songs with lots of words, because people don't hear them. They could see them here, but if you were out in the street, you wouldn't have picked up what all those words were, I don't think. So that's our experience. Absolutely simple. Obviously, the idea of rounds and chants that you know the music of is one way in, and if not, they have to be extremely quick to pick up with very few words for it to work. And that's,
Because someone did mention with question and answer, the first two responses, nice and easy because they're the same.
Yeah.
And then it starts getting different. And the end one in particular was completely different rhythm, completely different tune, and that does make it harder.
I think I'm kind of a bit surprised by, like you just mentioned, the songs themselves are a bit repetitive and it's try to keep itself simple. But I'm equally surprised by how the composers seem to use specific devices to make it both simple and effective. We just mentioned the changes in the rhythmic devices. I think we are maybe the audience, including me, we keep a little bit distance from the historical events. But if I just think a little bit carefully about the rhythmic devices themselves, I think there's like deliberate techniques there to try to compile like acceleration of the rhythm. Not really, but the devices. I mean, the rhythm itself is like a gear. It's like fastened in the third and fourth verses. And if we are trying to putting ourselves in the context to think about how we really felt in the situation, then we might feel much more easier to memorize the changes in the rhythms. That's how I felt about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point where we're sort of like in the question and answer, we're sort of building up, and then you've got to go, yes, and so it's got this sort of shape to it, or like emotional shape to each verse. Yeah, I agree. But it's interesting as well, some of the Isla songs, I think, are, they're very complex in some ways, but they're just really repetitive, tiny little bits. So you have this solidarity song where it's just like, da, 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 and it just goes on like this, and then you just say solidarity. So it's really sort of, he kind of like, but it's very, very rhythmic and energetic, so he really nailed that, I think. His worker songs are better than Bush's, I have to say. Yeah.
The last thing I did before I came was a meeting at One Planet Abingdon Climate Emergency Centre, and we have two ideas for next year. One will be an assembly of some description, but the other is to fill Abingdon Marketplace with something. And I said, until we have a name for it, it'd be very difficult really to recruit and get people enthusiastic. The name pageant, to me, I don't think it has the right 2024 resonance, but we don't have anything else. And we also will need some producer that will pick up quite a lot of those elements. Yeah. But again, 2024. But I'm not sure about, what do people think about the word pageant in 2024? No.
Flash mob.
Yeah.
Well, there might be a flash mob.
Oh.
Community performance, Daniel. Bit long-winded, but yeah, not so 1920s.
We don't have a current equivalent, do we?
No, but it is this sort of very weird thing, but you can have experimental performance, community performance makes it sound cooler. Yeah.
What's the acronym for really weird things?
Yes.
A gathering.
I'm still waiting for some good advice. Yeah.
So I'm the gentleman in purple hat.
Thanks. Just going back to your question to the audience about where next for these songs. I think so much has come along in the repertoire, particularly driven by the folk movement since then. So maybe given that bourgeoisie, middle-class choral tradition hasn't been shifted, as far as I'm aware. I never go and watch them, but I don't think it has. The little bits that you ever see in the media, they tend to be all very jolly. I think if you were setting up a situation where you wanted call and response from an audience, context is everything. Familiarity with the round is fine. If it's Frere Jacques, we've already acknowledged that the Q&A was quite difficult to get the response going because of the way it subtly changed. So I'm not saying no, they should stay where they were in time, but they were very much songs of their time. I just think we've got so much more to draw upon now. I've only seen Radical Choir once before, and it wasn't really participative. It was an outdoor event, and they were singing broadsides, but they were educating people, I think, to a certain left-wing view, but they weren't expecting us to join in. Some might have done, but equally, if you were to have a rally or whatever you end up calling it in Abingdon, and people are aware that they're expected to join in, just as we sometimes do in the left field tent at Glastonbury, singing along to Billy Bragg, everybody's singing along. But it's a self-selecting audience, to your point earlier. That's why they're in the left field tent and not at the pyramid stage watching Beyonce, because they'd rather watch Billy Bragg. But That's a very long answer to probably saying, not for me.
But I think also in many ways they should be transient, because the whole point is this should be what's new and up to date in 1939, not what's new and up to date in 2023, and that it's what's topical then and what's topical now. So it's more sort of, I think if anything comes up, I mean, the round of Extinction Rebellion shows it's more the sort of the principles and techniques that survive rather than the musical artifacts themselves. And that's sort of what it should be, I would say. Because it's, I mean, and it's also interesting how you can think of a very successful audience participation phenomenon in recent years is everyone singing Sweet Caroline at the football. So that it's like they can do it if you get the right and the choice of song in that case, I mean, it's almost arbitrary what the song that becomes the one associated is, but then that can be very resonant with people. Go, Charles.
Sorry, I just wanted to come back to this, the conversation about sort of simplicity and complexity in these songs. I mean, I suppose I have a very particular perspective on this, having, as you may have heard, the piano parts are not easy. You might have noticed from my attempts to grapple with them. And I wasn't even playing all of the notes, if we're completely honest. And so there is something in this music, and that seems quite distinct, you know, from like the brass band culture, which was, you know, done to extremely high standard in lots of cases, right? But it was a fully participatory thing where workers were fully involved. And it feels to me like in this music, there's a sort of expectation built in that you'll have some kind of intellectuals involved, right, who are going to lead this endeavor. You'll have someone playing the piano, these complicated dissonant parts, and maybe someone to lead the thing. In a way that to me seems quite distinct maybe from the brass band culture as more of a kind of bottom-up enterprise. But that's purely from my struggles with these piano parts is where that comes from. Yeah, thanks.
I think that's very true. I mean, it's also like composers just can't restrain themselves either, can they? They really, like, they don't want to compose something too simple. It's like no fun for them. But, yeah. If I may suggest it, it would be an excellent time. We have free wine, orange juice, and everything else out in the foyer. So please do stick around and have a glass of wine. Thank you so much again for your enthusiasm and feedback and participation in this event. And thank you so much again to the Sea Green Singers and Giles on the piano for being so enthusiastic and so up for this evening's entertainment. And Harry as well, yeah.